A police officer strikes a woman with his baton, laughing with his colleagues, unaware that she is about to become their new chief of police. What happens when the one they humiliate is the one who holds their future in her hands? Will she seek revenge or justice? And how far can corruption go before it finally collapses? Stay with us as we uncover this intense and shocking story. And don't forget, hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Brooklyn Central Police Precinct smelled like stale coffee, sweat, and unspoken authority. Officers moved through the halls, chatting in low voices, exchanging inside jokes, their boots scuffing against the tiled floor. It was a world built on routine, on familiarity, where outsiders were noticed immediately. Naomi Carter stepped through the front doors, her dark blazer perfectly pressed, her shoulders squared. She wasn't just another visitor. She wasn't a lawyer or a concerned citizen filing a complaint. She was the new chief of police. But no one knew it yet. She had spent years preparing for this moment, climbing the ranks in a system that had done everything to push her out, fighting against the whispers that she had only made it this far because of quotas, because they needed a black woman in leadership. But she had proved them wrong, again and again. Now, she was here to do it one last time. At the front desk, a burly officer with a buzz cut leaned lazily against the counter, twirling a pen between his fingers. His name tag read Monroe. He barely glanced up before speaking. "You lost, lady?" he asked, not even bothering to hide his smirk. Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "I need to speak with the captain." Monroe chuckled, looking her up and down. "You a lawyer? Social services? Or you here to report some guy loitering outside your building?" Behind him, another officer laughed under his breath. Naomi kept her voice even. "This isn't a personal matter. It's about work." Monroe's smirk widened. "Work? You don't look like a cop to me. And if you were, I'd know you." Naomi felt her fingers tighten slightly around the handle of her bag. She had prepared for resistance. She had expected doubt. She just hadn't expected it this quickly. "If you're here for a complaint, take a number," Monroe continued, gesturing toward a sign-in sheet. "Otherwise, you can wait your turn like everyone else." Naomi exhaled slowly, suppressing the anger simmering just beneath her skin. "I won't be waiting in line. Not now, not ever. Because soon, they would all know exactly who she was." "Put your hands where I can see them." The sharp command cut through the air like a gunshot. Naomi barely had time to react before Officer Monroe took a step forward, his stance aggressive, his hand resting on the baton strapped to his belt. The lazy arrogance he had displayed moments ago was gone, replaced by thinly veiled hostility. "You think you can just walk in here without clearance?" he sneered. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Every muscle in Naomi's body tensed, not from fear, but from sheer disbelief. She had anticipated resistance, but not this fast, and not this blatant. The room shifted. A few officers turned their heads, some pretending not to notice, others watching with smug amusement. No one stepped in. No one stopped him. Naomi stood her ground. "I already told you. I'm here on official business." Monroe snorted. "Yeah? Well, I don't give a damn. You don't belong here. I don't know how you got past the front desk, but you've got 2 seconds to turn around before I drag you out myself." Naomi felt the weight of every stare in the room pressing down on her. The thick, suffocating atmosphere of hostility was impossible to ignore. "You don't know who I am," she said, keeping her voice steady. Monroe's lip curled into a sneer. "Oh, I know exactly who you are." He stepped closer, his boots clacking against the tile floor, his presence overwhelming. His baton tapped against his palm. A silent threat. "You're trouble. That's what you are," he muttered. Then he reached for her arm. The movement was swift, meant to intimidate, to dominate. But Naomi stepped back, dodging his grasp. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't touch me." Laughter broke out from a few corners of the room. "You hear that? She thinks she's in charge." Someone jeered. Monroe's eyes darkened. The baton in his grip lifted slightly higher. "You're about to learn how things work around here." And then, "Officer Monroe, stand down." The commanding voice came from the entrance, slicing through the tension in the room. Monroe froze. Officers turned their heads toward the doorway, where Captain James Delgado stood. His face was carved from stone, unreadable, but there was an edge of anger beneath his cold exterior. "What the hell is going on here?" Delgado demanded. Monroe hesitated. "She was trespassing." "She," Naomi interrupted, her voice cold and firm, "is your new chief of police." The room went silent, dead silent. Naomi took a slow step forward, her gaze locked on Monroe, watching as realization dawned on his face. He looked at her, then at Delgado, then back at her. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No way." Naomi reached into her pocket, pulled out a sleek leather case, and flipped it open. The golden badge inside gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Naomi Carter, Chief of Police." Gasps rippled through the gathered officers. Monroe's face drained of color. Captain Delgado's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but his tone remained firm. "Officer Monroe," he said, "step back. Now." Monroe's fists clenched. His breathing was heavy, ragged. "This is some kind of joke," he muttered under his breath. "No," Naomi said, her voice as sharp as steel. "But I think you are." The room remained frozen. Some officers looked at Monroe. Others looked at Naomi. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it. Naomi turned to face the rest of the room. "I know exactly what kind of precinct this is," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "I know the games you play, the things you cover up. That ends today." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Monroe's breathing was ragged, furious. He took a step forward, but Delgado grabbed his arm. "Enough," Delgado muttered, his voice a low growl. Naomi took one last look around the room, meeting every gaze head-on. "I will clean this place up," she said, "even if I have to tear it apart first." Then she turned to Delgado. "Captain, I'll see you in my office in 5 minutes." And with that, she walked away. Behind her, the silence was deafening. The weight of Naomi's words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. For the first time, Monroe looked uncertain. The sneer that had been glued to his face since the moment she walked in was now wiped clean, replaced by something else: shock, embarrassment, and beneath it all, fear. Captain Delgado exhaled sharply, breaking the silence. "You heard the Chief, Monroe," he said, his tone controlled, but firm. "Step back." Monroe's jaw clenched. He wasn't the type to back down easily, not in front of an audience. But Delgado's voice held authority, and for all of Monroe's arrogance, he knew better than to defy a direct order from a superior. Slowly, he took a small, stiff step back. The room remained dead silent. Officers shifted awkwardly, some exchanging glances, others pretending to be busy. Naomi could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air, the discomfort settling into their bones. "This is some kind of joke," Monroe muttered under his breath. "There's no way." "Oh, it's very real," Naomi cut in smoothly. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, forcing him to look her in the eyes. And trust me, Officer Monroe, you'll be feeling the weight of that reality very soon. A flicker of something ugly crossed his face. You don't belong here, he spat. You'll never belong here. Naomi tilted her head, considering him. That's what scares you, isn't it? She said, her voice cool and composed. Monroe said nothing. She let the silence stretch, let the tension simmer. Then slowly she turned, sweeping her gaze across the room. I know exactly what kind of precinct this is, she said, her voice measured, deliberate. The culture that's been allowed to fester here, the cover-ups, the misconduct, the abuse of power. It all ends today. A murmur rippled through the gathered officers. Some looked away. Others stared back defiantly. Naomi didn't care. Change is coming, she said, stepping away from Monroe, her posture straight, unwavering. And you'd better decide which side of it you want to be on. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward her office. Behind her, the station buzzed with whispers, but no one dared to stop her. The precinct was buzzing. Within an hour, news of the confrontation had spread like wildfire. Officers huddled in small groups, whispering behind cups of stale coffee, exchanging glances whenever Naomi passed. Some were merely curious, wondering if she would survive her first week. Others were furious, viewing her as an outsider, a disruptor, someone who had no right to upend the way things had always been. And then there was Monroe, suspended, pending investigation. Naomi sat in her office, flipping through his file. The more she read, the deeper her disgust grew. A dozen complaints of excessive force, multiple allegations of racial profiling, internal affairs investigations that mysteriously went nowhere, missing evidence, witnesses who changed their stories overnight. He wasn't just a bad cop. He was part of a system that protected bad cops. A sharp knock at her door. Come in. Captain Delgado entered, his expression unreadable. You've been busy, he said, glancing at the stack of files spread across her desk. Naomi gestured to them. Monroe isn't just a problem. He's a symptom. This precinct has been running unchecked for years. I intend to change that. Delgado studied her, then exhaled through his nose. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. Naomi leaned back in her chair. Good. Before Delgado could respond, her office phone rang. She picked it up, listening to the frantic voice on the other end. Chief, you need to turn on the news. Naomi grabbed the remote and switched on the small TV mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life. A breaking news banner flashed in red. Exclusive footage. Brooklyn officer assaults chief of police. Her stomach tightened as the surveillance video played. The footage showed everything. Monroe grabbing her arm, shoving her, raising his baton. The mocking laughter from the other officers. The exact moment Captain Delgado intervened. A political bombshell. The news anchor's voice carried through the room. Civil rights groups are already calling for accountability. Protesters have begun gathering outside Brooklyn Central, demanding justice for what they are calling taunts and abuse of power. The mayor's office has yet to release a statement. Naomi felt a shift in the air. She had expected resistance, but this had just escalated beyond the precinct's walls. Delgado rubbed his face, letting out a low whistle. Hell of a first day, Chief. Naomi didn't smile, because she knew. This was just the beginning. The protests outside Brooklyn Central started small. A handful of people holding signs, a few reporters with cameras, some quiet murmurs of outrage. But by midday, the crowd had doubled, then tripled. The video of Monroe assaulting Naomi had gone viral overnight. The story wasn't just about one racist cop. It was about a corrupt system, a department that had covered for him for years. Inside the precinct, The tension was suffocating. Officers walked the halls on edge, speaking in hushed voices. Some were nervous, others were angry. Monroe might have been suspended, but he still had allies, officers who believed she didn't belong here. Naomi felt their glares as she walked through the halls. "She's tearing this place apart," she heard one officer mutter. "She's making us look bad. She won't last long." Naomi stopped mid-step, turning slowly. The two officers standing by the break room froze as she locked eyes with them. "You think this is about you looking bad?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You think I made Monroe tackle me? Raise his baton." Silence. "This isn't about me ruining your reputation," Naomi continued. "Monroe did that himself, and anyone who covered for him is just as guilty." Neither officer spoke. One of them swallowed hard and turned away. "Good." Naomi entered her office, where Captain Delgado and Lieutenant Harris were already waiting. The mayor's office had just sent an official statement, full support for Chief Carter. A department-wide investigation into misconduct, immediate action against any officer found guilty of wrongdoing. Delgado exhaled, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just about Monroe anymore." "It never was," Naomi said, tossing another file onto the desk. Harris, who had been quiet so far, finally spoke. "You know they won't take this lying down, right?" Naomi looked up. "Who?" "The officers who have been covering for Monroe. The ones who have something to lose." Naomi didn't blink. "Then they should be worried." A long silence stretched between them. Delgado shook his head, with something almost like admiration. "You're not scared, are you?" Naomi's lips curled into a cold smile. "I've spent my whole life fighting men like Monroe. This precinct isn't the first battleground I've stepped into, and it won't be the last." Outside, the protesters grew louder. Inside, the war had just begun. The air in the precinct was thick with tension. It was past midnight, and most of the desks sat empty. But Naomi wasn't alone. She stood in her office, reviewing the latest reports, when her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "You should leave before it's too late." She stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. A warning. A threat. Naomi had expected this. She had rattled too many cages, exposed too many secrets. Monroe wasn't the only one who had something to lose. A knock at her door. Captain Delgado stepped inside. "We got something." His voice was grim. Naomi followed him down the hall to the security room, where Lieutenant Harris was waiting. He gestured to the monitors. "Warehouse District? Monroe's there, meeting with some of his old crew." Naomi's jaw tightened. "He's not supposed to be anywhere near active officers." Harris nodded. "Exactly. But he's got people on the inside, officers who still take his calls." She took a deep breath. This was it. "Let's move." They approached the warehouse in silence. The dim streetlights barely illuminated the cracked pavement. Delgado signaled his team to spread out. Naomi could hear muffled voices inside, then Monroe's unmistakable growl. "We're not going down like this." A second voice. "What do we do?" "We make her regret stepping into our precinct." Naomi pushed the door open. The room froze. Monroe spun around, his face twisted with rage. "You, me." Naomi cut him off, stepping forward. The officers surrounding him looked uneasy. "It's over, Monroe," she said, her voice steady. "Your little empire. It ends tonight." Monroe laughed, shaking his head. "You really think you've won?" he spat. "You think these guys are gonna follow you? That you can just save it?" Delgado's voice cut in, as officers burst in from the back, weapons drawn. Monroe stiffened. His crew scrambled, raising their hands. But Monroe. He lunged. Naomi was ready. She stepped aside, letting his momentum work against him. He hit the ground hard. Before he could move, cuffs snapped around his wrists. Naomi crouched beside him. "This isn't over," Monroe hissed. Naomi smiled coldly. "Yes, it is." The precinct felt different, not lighter, not calmer, but different. Monroe was gone. His badge, his weapon, his influence, all stripped away. The officers who had stood by him were now under investigation, their careers hanging by a thread. But Naomi knew this wasn't the end. As she walked through the halls, she could feel the weight of every stare. Some were cautious, some were hostile. A few held something close to respect. Captain Delgado was waiting by her office. "Well, Chief," he said, arms crossed. "You did what you came here to do." Naomi met his gaze. "Not yet." He tilted his head. "Monroe's out. Half of his people are on suspension. The mayor's backing your reforms. What more is there?" Naomi exhaled, scanning the station. "It's not just about getting rid of the bad ones," she said. "It's about rebuilding this place from the ground up. Changing the way they think, the way they act. That takes time." Delgado studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I hope you're ready for the fight ahead." Naomi gave a small, determined smile. "I've been ready my whole life." She turned, stepping into her office. Through the window, she could see the last remnants of the protest outside, people still holding signs, demanding justice. She wasn't done, not even close. Because this wasn't just about one racist cop. It was about all of them. And Naomi Carter? She was just getting started. This story is more than just a tale of corruption and justice. It's a reflection of the real-world battles against systemic racism, abuse of power, and the struggle for accountability. Naomi Carter's journey teaches us several key lessons. Courage is necessary for change. Standing up against an unjust system isn't easy. Whether in the workplace, in law enforcement, or in daily life, challenging the status quo takes bravery. Change doesn't happen overnight. Naomi's battle didn't end with Monroe's arrest. It was just the beginning. True reform takes persistence, strategy, and resilience. Silence is complicity. Many officers knew Monroe was corrupt, but they stayed quiet. This reflects a harsh truth. Allowing injustice to continue makes you part of the problem. We must speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. Power should be earned, not abused. Authority is not a license for discrimination or violence. Leaders, whether in law enforcement or any field, must act with integrity. How can we apply this? Hold people accountable, whether they're colleagues, leaders, or public officials. Support policies that demand transparency in law enforcement. Be an advocate for justice, even when it doesn't affect you directly. The fight for equality isn't just Naomi Carter's fight. It's ours. Today's story isn't just about corruption and justice. It's about the choices we make when faced with adversity. Naomi Carter stood her ground, knowing the risks, refusing to back down. But not everyone has that option. If you were in Naomi's position, what would you do? Would you, 1. Fight to expose the truth, even if it meant risking your career and personal safety? 2. Step back, avoid conflict, and try to work within the system to create slow change. Comment 1 or 2 below. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think is the best way to fight injustice? And if this story resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe, and share to help spread the message. Justice starts with awareness. Let's keep the conversation going.